Good evening, everyone. So sorry for the delay. Since we're already in session, Ms. Bell, would you take the roll? Here. Here. Present. Stand for the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, if we can move to the August consent agenda review. Any discussion?
I just had sort of a general question, Dr. Adams. And it relates to 810-2103 and 810-2105. And both of these are dealing with trauma with our students. It seems like, through these consent agendas, we have a lot of these agreements that pop up that focus on certain schools or certain populations, and there's a lot of community and partnerships that we have with different groups. I was wondering if it's feasible, and I'm also wondering if the board would find this helpful, if we had sort of a more full report about all of the different partnerships, particularly around these sorts of trauma issues that we have in our schools. Because I'm also curious too, if there's gaps that we have with certain schools or student populations.
Yes, sir, we could provide that to you. The Student Support Office is the one that normally manages these relationships, and we do prepare a report annually relative to it. I don't know that we could have it ready for the 13th, but we definitely could have it ready for you at the work session for sure. If not on the 10th of August, we can provide that to you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think that would be helpful. And I am curious what the board thinks too, because this seems like this keeps touching everything that we do. And so just to have a more cohesive, comprehensive sort of understanding in my mind would be helpful, but I just would imagine as a board, it would be helpful as well.
Yes, sir. And you want this as it relates to student support? Am I
Yes.
correct? Got it. Yes, sir.
I agree. I think to see, because the student support is kind of like one of the biggest anchors for the district. And that's where a lot of engagement on so many different levels is occurring. I'm hoping that what you're asking for, Matt, is what I was kind of looking for, is like some level of a comprehensive plan for what they're looking to do for this upcoming school year. We've been faced with kids being shot, all the trauma that we're seeing, and a lot of this consent agreement that people's services we know is needed, but do we as a district have a plan?
Yes, we'll work to get that prepared for you for the 10th.
I think it would also be beneficial just to have, and I know it's a huge undertaking because I know the Pillar 5 community or the committee which I serve on has been working on this at least before the pandemic, but a list of all the MOUs we have with local agencies to see where we have crossovers and gaps, and also opportunities for expansion, because we all have people in our communities who are asking us, how can we help with SLPS? And if we have a comprehensive list of where we are lacking things and where we need things, I think that would help. So just kind of expanding on Matt's request.
Yeah, we can provide you that. We do have a comprehensive list from last school year. Obviously, those things that have been renewed as well, but we can obviously provide you a comprehensive list of all MOUs and then pull out the ones that are mental health related. Yes, we can do that.
And I'd like to follow up with what my colleagues have said. 08-10-2101 and 08-10-2102. First, what's the level of detail for that memorandum of understanding? I know there's some backup documentation, but it doesn't speak to the level of detail for '01. And for '02, what has been the impact on student outcomes through
Uh,
this mentoring and the cognitive coaching?
Um,
How has that impacted student outcomes?
Item 2 is related to professional development for staff,
Mhm.
not necessarily students, so it's staff related. I can get you a report on these two. There should have been backup documentation in both of these, but I can provide that to you prior to prior to the meeting.
So I have just kind of a general question on a specific topic. Back, I think it was in May, we approved, I guess it was, we ratified an amount to a contract for our lobbyist. And I have not seen that contract come back up for a full renewal. I believe we approved it in June of 2020 last. Do we have a timeline on when that is going to be? Carroll and Associates?
That has been approved by the board, if I remember correctly, in March or April. And so it is approved for the 21-22 school year.
So I thought that was just an additional $90,000 or an additional amount above the $83,000 rather than a new contract.
The board did do that, but they also approved the new contract as well.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. And I'll get you the date when that was approved.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks.
okay.
Can I see the contract? Can I get the contract?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
Just a point of clarification, was 8-10-2104 what we pulled out and approved last meeting?
Yes, it is. It's not again because it's still on the agenda, but yes, this is what you approved last time for Walgreens to do the testing, which they started, quite frankly, last week and are continuing now.
Dr. Adams, what is the turnout for that? How is that going?
We tested all persons in central office starting I guess the day after the board approved it. And right now, staff is coming in our building. Walgreens is, it's happening across the city. They have to present a code, and that information goes into a file for us to review. But it's going quite well. At this point in time, I can basically let you know what the percentages are for principals and assistant principals in terms of how many have been vaccinated and all of that kind of information. So we've been collecting that data. The board does have a policy that I'll likely talk to the board about on the 10th, that we will be likely requesting in light of what's happening with COVID-19 and the variants that's taking place. You already approved a policy that allows us to, if persons are not vaccinated, those persons can be tested on a regular basis. And so we're having some conversation internally about how best to address that issue. You may have heard about it happening in New York and other states and other school districts. And so we are contemplating the notion of what the policy that you already approved, vaccinations or testing, either or for employees moving forward. But at this point in time, persons who are quarantined, right now, we pay the cost if they're out for 10 days. And so those persons who may not have been vaccinated, if they have to be quarantined because of contact tracing, the notion of them using their own days as opposed to us covering the cost of them to do that. So the board already passed that policy, I want to say last February or March. And so we're looking at that policy closely in light of what's happening with COVID-19 and the variants.
And the new variant.
And so we'll give the board an update once we get to that place, but you've already approved the ability for administration to do that.
So are the principals and the staff administrators getting vaccinated? Is it a high percentage that are actually getting vaccinated, or is it not as high?
I think the numbers right now are about 94%. I think the numbers are high 90s,
Okay.
right around 90.
Do we have any sort of exceptions for people who have, immunocompromised or can't otherwise get the vaccine?
I'll let
Um,
legal speak to that, but
Okay.
there are some exemptions that are existing within our policy.
Oh, I said, do we have any exemptions for people who are immunocompromised or unable to get a vaccine?
Exemptions from the policy that Dr. Adams was correct. Those who have, it depends. I don't want to say blanketly, but it is on a case-by-case basis. Yes.
No further discussion, Dr. Adams?
Yeah, I just want to recap to make sure I'm clear. Partnership reports, plan for mental health, MOU agreements, so holistically, all of them. The Carolyn Associates contract, a copy of that, as well as the date that it was approved. I want to make sure I'm recapping what the board has requested. Okay, thank you very much. The board president requested a detailed update on APR, the annual performance report. You received a part of that at the last board meeting. The board president asked for some additional information, so we added that to the PowerPoint. So you have the PowerPoint in front of you. At this point in time, we will see an electronic copy. So I'm going to ask that Ms. Cheryl Van Oy, who is managing the Accountability Assessment Office and Data Office, to give the board an exhaustive update on where we are around this. It is a historical perspective, some idea about what we think will happen moving forward, but it's a quite lengthy presentation, Madam President, but you've asked for every detail relative to this, and so I want to give the board a real good idea of what's happening in this space.
And Dr. Adams, I appreciate that, but it's important that as a board, we understand the data as we move forward, making decisions that are going to impact our students and families. And also, it's the first time that we've been together as a complete board to hear this information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tonight, I'm going to share information about the annual performance report, or we call it the APR. I'll outline the history of the Missouri Assessment Program. I'll show you some details of an actual APR. We'll talk about the changes that were enacted in the 2019 APR. We'll discuss MSIP 6. We'll do a summary, and at the end, I'll be open to any questions you may have. This is a timeline of MSIP back when it first started in 1990. You can see we're into 5 cycles, MSIP 1 through MSIP 5. They typically last 5 years, but due to some anomalies in some testing in the last 4 or 5 years, MSIP 5 has lasted longer than the 5 years. The first couple of cycles were really determined by processes and procedures that the district did. And MSIP 3, 4, and 5 is when student performance was also measured. So the Missouri Assessment Program, or MAP, was created in 1993 due to the Outstanding Schools Act, and it began with grade span assessments. So for instance, only the 3rd, 7th, and 11th graders would take the ComArts assessment, and only the 4th, 8th, and 10th graders would take the math assessment. We had science in 3rd, 7th, and 10th, and at that time, we didn't have any social studies assessment at all. When No Child Left Behind was enacted in 2001, that law required us to assess students annually rather than 3rd, 7th, and 11th grades. So now ComArts and math are 3rd through 8th, and it also indicated that we needed 1 in high school. They phased in an approach with the science grade span, but they kept that at 5th, 8th, and once in high school. In 2008-09, they began the end of course assessments, or EOC, and they started with Algebra 1, English 2, and Biology. So students who were enrolled in that course and who were being successful in the course would be exposed to the EOC assessment. In 2009-10, they added American History, Government, English 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. Again, if the student was in the course and they were maintaining a passing grade, then they would take that assessment. And in 2009-10, the EOCs were the first assessments to be given all online. Previously, everything had been in a book form. In 2014, the MAP assessment for the 3rd through 8th graders was also offered in only the online method. Over the years since 1993, there have been multiple changes in the questions. We've gone from grade level assessments or GLAs to Show Me standards. We've gone to Missouri Learning Standards, MLS, which is what we're currently in. And then for a little bit, we were with the Common Core due to Race to the Top grants. The state of Missouri chose Smarter Balance rather than PARC, and it was the Common Core assessment. Then we went to Data Recognition Corporation, or DRC, and now we're back to the Missouri Learning Standards, MLS. And through all of those, there were always field test items in the assessments. Inside each of these that were outlined above, there could have been changes in the question types, the skills assessed, scoring modifications, along with additions and modifications of specific assessments. And one year, in fact, these scores were thrown out at the high school level because of testing anomalies. Previous versions of the MSIP were based on standards and our points, and processes were reviewed and performance was measured. Metrics were set, and then accreditation was determined. So this annual performance report is what gives school districts unaccredited, provisional, or full accreditation. The information was designed to provide feedback to districts on how your students were performing. APRs have been available to districts, and in some years, actually, they did provide school annual performance reports also. So SLPS, how we got here. There's a lot of data on the screen, and I just want to highlight a couple of things. If you look on the far left, these were the standards in MSIP 3 and MSIP 4. As I indicated before, it used to be a grade span, so it was a specific grade level, took a specific course. At this time, there were 15 standards, and you had to get more than half in order to stay fully accredited. In 2006, at the bottom, you can see that for the MSIP 3 standards, the district earned 4 of the 15 standards. In 2007, it's highlighted in yellow because that's when the full accreditation was removed from the district. And that year, the district earned 2 of the 15 standards. You can see the met in specific rows, and you can see what we met or did not meet. The main thing to talk about with CCR in this situation is a lot of the standards are still enacted, like ACT, but they mainly just wanted to know how many kids took it, not how did they do on that assessment. So as I said earlier, before it was more about a checklist. Are you doing it? Yes or no? And as we look at MSIP 5 in the next couple screens, we had to start sharing the performance of the actual students. The current system, which is MSIP 5, is now looking at 5 standards. And those are outlined in academic achievement, subgroup achievement, college and career readiness, or CCR, attendance, and graduation rate. In previous MSIPs, they looked at dropout rate, but starting with MSIP 5, they started looking at graduation rate. And rather than specific met or not met in standards, they changed to percentage points. And the most that a district could earn was 120. You had to earn at least 70% in order to stay fully accredited, 50% to be provisionally accredited. The other thing that changed in MSIP 5 was the previous MSIPs looked at 5 years of data. With MSIP 5, they moved to 3 years of data. So they wanted districts to turn low performing around quicker. So that between the percentages and the number of years that they were looking at, those were both significant changes. So if you look at the screen now, these are the results of actual MSIP 4. And these standards, as I mentioned before, were academic achievement, subgroup, CCR, attendance, and graduation rate. At the bottom, you can see the percentages that the district earned. And the yellow indicates when we were above the required 70% to be full accredited. And you'll notice the yellow at the top, that's when the district received provisional accreditation. And then on the far right, in January of 17, we received full accreditation. If you look at graduation rate, this is the first year that they looked at 4, 5, 6, and 7-year graduation rate. They calculate all 4 of those, and the district gets credit for the highest earned. So you'll notice where the yellow is, where we earned the highest points. So the points are listed there, but at the bottom, you add the points up to get the percentages. There's 30 points possible in graduation rate. This is what the summary APR used to look like, and this is the one from 2018. So it was the 17-18 results that were embargoed until February 2019, so we couldn't share them with the public until after the embargo was released. You'll see the APR points earned, you'll see the percentage, and then below that, you'll see the points earned and the percentage for each of the 5 standards that we've talked about. This is the detail APR on the screen. This shows by standard how many points we earned, and it shows the 3 years that I talked about earlier. Remember, prior to this, it was 5 years of data. Now it's 3 years of data, and I have a blue arrow showing where the points are outlined. So there's a description for ELA. They move ComArts to be English Language Arts. There's one for math, there's one for science, and there's one for social studies. This is also replicated, I didn't have it on the screen, for subgroup achievement. If you have a student who is African American, who is free and reduced lunch, who is homeless, and who has an IEP, they would be in what they call the super subgroup for the district. So you have their academic achievement for the overall district, and then you have academic achievement for the subgroup, super subgroup. When they released changes in 2019, as I said earlier, they went to 5 standards, but in 19, they changed it from meeting standards to giving you colors of spans. So floor, approaching, on track, and target. So they removed all the points possible and all the points earned from the 2019 APR and forward. The only districts that they were actually going to show points on were the 5 school districts across the state who were still unaccredited. But everyone else was going to get the grade span color that I'll show you in just a minute. Locally, districts can still use this information to identify how our curriculum is doing, weaknesses in the standards, make sure that we modify current practices and procedures to help students achieve higher, make sure that we provide information to our stakeholders. And also, this is what we use to set internal goals for the district and each school. So this is what the new 2019 APR report looked like. Remember, I talked about floor, approaching, target, and I forget the other one, sorry. The red, yellow, the orange, and the green. This is an example of the academic achievement and subgroup all on one page. I didn't share it on the screen, but there's also a similar color sheet for CCR, attendance, and graduation rate. This is what the detail looks like. Notice there's no points on here anymore. Notice there's no points earned. It's strictly the scores. At the commissioners meeting in August of 2019, this is when they shared the changes that we were going to see in the actual APR from 19. They wanted to make sure that districts weren't focusing just on points, and they wanted to help districts share what students were doing rather than worrying about staying accredited. So that was the reason that the commissioner gave for going from a point structure to a color structure with spans. So remember, on the left is what the summary APR used to look like with the points and percentages on the upper left. And then on the bottom right, that's what the summary looks like from now on, with the 4 colors by each of the 5 standards. And that's the comment, the 2019 APR summary. That was the comment that was in the documentation released at the Commissioners Committee meeting in August of 19. They are based on a weighted average of students achieving at the 4 academic levels by creating what they call a MAP performance index. Then they take the MAP performance index for each content area for 3 years and average it, and that's the numbers you see there. It's not by points, it's that MPI for each year. And they're looking for progress, meaning third grade to third grade, and they're looking for growth, which is Cheryl score to Cheryl score. So they're looking at both of those. So from the 2018-19 APR, I wanted to give you a couple of highlights, and that 76.8% of our elementary schools saw significant growth. Remember, growth is looking at individual students. We saw 70% in math. We saw math at 50% at the middle school level saw significant growth. We check our high school graduates 180 days after they graduate to see what they're doing. And 85.7% of our high school students were in the on track or exceeding level in a positive placement. Positive placement means 2-year, 4-year college, military, or gainfully employed. Our high school graduation rate showed that 64.3% of all of our high schools achieved in the on track or exceeding level. Now, individual high schools had their own graduation span, but for the district, it was 64.3. We're in the on track or exceeding level. In 2019, 20, and 2021, we haven't seen an APR for 1920 due to the pandemic because we did not have any achievement scores. We didn't take the assessment. There was a federal waiver that we did not have to assess in April of last year. In 2021, the last spring that we just had, we did do our assessments. All students had to come in person, even if they had been virtual all year. We still needed to test 95% of our students in order for the scores to count. Halfway through the window, DESE did release that down to 85% of our students had to come in and take the assessment. If we do not meet the 85% when the scores come back, we have the option of doing a quick fall window in September to get us to that 85%. What we've heard so far is DESE will share these scores. They will share them at the state, the district, and the school level, and they'll share it through the report card format that they have already created. But due to the COVID pandemic, the 2019 and the 2021 will not have an APR. We can still use the data to see how our curriculum is doing, to see where the strengths and weaknesses are that we've talked about previously, but there will not be an annual performance report for the last 2 years. So going forward, MSIP 6 was adopted by the state board in February of 2020. On the left-hand side, you will see the domains dealing with leadership. Remember when I spoke earlier, the first couple of MSIPs were all about processes and procedures. It was kind of like a checklist. Well, they've pulled that back into MSIP 6, and you can see the information that they will be evaluating for each district. And then on the right-hand side, this deals with the performance of the students, and these are the new domains that they will be looking at. One of the fallacies with the previous MSIPs were that equity was not honored, and you'll notice at the bottom of the performance, it does have a domain, equity and access, EA. With the previous accreditation cycles, school districts could choose to not focus on subgroups because they could be fully accredited without any of those points. So going forward, it's important that they've honored that equity and access should be its own standing standard. MSIP 6 was approved in February, and the law says that they have to enact it within 24 months after that. So that means it will be enacted in February of 2022, the upcoming February. So for the next 2 school years, 21-22 and 22-23, we will receive 2 annual performance reports. We're still aligned to MSIP 5, but they will show us what MSIP 6 is going to look like with the new metrics so that the districts can get an idea on how they are going to look going forward. In 2023-24, there will only be 1 APR, and that will be MSIP 6. No metrics at this time have been set for MSIP 6. There are committees at DESI's level that get together and talk about what should these scores be in order to be in the floor or the targeted. At this point, we are not on a committee, but I anticipate that that will change because in the past 4 cycles, we have had SLPS representation at the table with DESI. So changes on the horizon. Remember earlier when I said there have been multiple assessments and multiple changes? In 2021-22, they will start their new analysis of new assessments. They will investigate that with district stakeholders, state stakeholders. In 22-24, they will release it. And in 24-25, we will have a brand new assessment. They haven't said if it'll be in all content areas or 1 or 2 content areas, but in 2024-25, we will have brand new assessments. This is very small and I apologize, but these are the buckets that DESI goes through in order to start from the existing assessment to the assessment that we will see in 2024-25. So it's not an easy task, but these are the different things that they will go through in order for us to have a new assessment going forward. And here is the timeline that I have kind of outlined with the upcoming changes in the assessment. I know that was a lot of information. I am certainly open to clarifying questions.
So let me provide some clarity to the board. The board received, Ms. Benoit, the entire packet. So the hidden slides, they also received as well with the predictions. Because we took those slides out for our presentation, obviously with discussion points for us, and we are still waiting for data from the recent assessments, we didn't share the prediction information. And so there are a couple of slides that are in there that says prediction. We'll come back to the board when we get some more data from the state relative to that. Plus another couple of slides were still in there that should have been, that were not presented as well. So I just want to provide the board with some clarity why the packets they have don't align 100% with what you have. Everything you covered is in here. It's just that it's not in the same order in some cases.
Agreed.
So I had a question about the 85% participation expectation. What are we at now?
We don't have that completed as of now. We're waiting to do our what they call ID cleanup for so students who did not graduate, they were not required to take the assessment until they actually are going to graduate. So we have some students that might have taken English 1 at a different school district. And so we're working on those, they call them end of course exemptions. So we're working on certifying our exemptions so that we can determine our participation rate. But overall, specifically at the elementary and middle school level, our participation rates were very high. We did have some parents that did not want the students to come in the virtual environment into the school. And so we had documentation that we had to keep in order to show DESI that some parents opted out from that opportunity.
Thank you. My other question was about the representation with DESI. You said that we're not currently on a committee. Who has historically represented us in the past with DESI?
I have.
You are our representative? Okay.
Mhm.
Good to know. Thank you.
Mhm.
I don't know if I asked this question before, but it always comes back to me. What is our homeless population? Do we know what our percentage is?
I can get you that. That is a requirement with our June core data that we certify, and I can certainly provide that percentage. I don't have that off the top of my head.
The last numbers we looked at were about 22%, about 2,000 students,
Mhm.
which represents about 10% of our population.
Is this the students or the family as a whole?
Any kid that is identified as there's some McKinney-Vento requirements that checks off exactly if the kid is homeless based upon certain conditions. The kid could be double up. The kid could not have slept in the same place over the last week. So there's some criteria that the federal government uses for homelessness because they do provide some additional dollars to districts that are that way. I can get you that criteria that kind of lays out what that criteria is.
And do we have or will we have something in place? Because what I'm looking at is this percentage and is this percentage from previous school years? And looking at what we have to come with this pandemic, with what's going on with rental housing, all of these factors that's coming into place. Do we have something in place to be able to better track and service that group?
Obviously, all of this is self-reported.
Mhm.
And so we can't be overbearing in terms of information. Once families share that information with us, we provide them support and services, or in some cases, rental assistance, in some cases, transportation assistance. So they have to self-report. If they don't self-report, we can't get that information outside of them self-reporting. But once our social workers notice that kids are coming late or their addresses have changed and those kinds of things, we use some investigative techniques to try to assist kids as much as we can once we get that information. So we do have some systems in place to support that. Deidre Thomas Murray does an excellent job in terms of providing that support, designated social workers in specific schools based on a population. So I can provide you with a full report of what we are doing right now and what the plan is to do moving forward.
And I think that helps, especially as board members, because that's a lot that comes to us. So it'll help to have like a resource thing to say, no, this is what we have, this, have you utilized these
Mhm.
particular resources to assist you?
Sure. And
Yeah.
so that is a by student count. So if a family has 4 children, then all 4 would be counted. Mhm. It's not a family count.
Ms. Benoit, are the numbers that we report, are they averages for all the schools in the district? For instance, any of these scores or percentages, are they based on averages of all schools and grades throughout the
Correct.
district?
The only thing that's pulled out is students who have not been in the school or district for a year.
Okay.
So if a student is not in the September membership count,
Mhm.
then they take the assessment. We still need
Okay.
to test them, but they're pulled out from accountability standpoint
Mhm.
because they weren't here in the September timeframe.
And I guess that leads me to the question, you're going to have some schools, of course, that are going to perform very well and other schools that are going to perform poorly. And we saw that in some of the scores we saw previously, like ACT scores, and other scores. How are we as a district going to focus on those schools that are performing very poorly and without capitalizing on the high performing schools to take up the slack for the low performing schools? I would hate to see schools left behind because we're trying to attain these accreditation scores, which are important. But what is our plan? What plan do we have in effect that prevents the district from putting less focus on the schools that are hurting the most academically, so that we could attain the scores that the state requires?
Sure. So as I said in one of the slides, DESE provides a district annual performance report. Some years they have created also a school APR. And other times we've created our own because they didn't share the by school, but we use that by school to set individual goals to make sure that every school, even the high performing, still increase, and those that are low performing also increase. So just because I might be at a specific level that would give me full accreditation if they gave school accreditation, we still have them achieve goals higher than what they did in the previous year.
I'm sorry. In addition to that, the state does provide additional dollars as they target schools, as they identify schools as comprehensive schools or targeted schools, and additional dollars are provided to support those schools, i.e., there are some high schools that receive up to $400,000 additional year for additional support for those particular schools. Right now, we have, I want to say, about 15 to 16 schools that are identified as comprehensive and targeted, and additional dollars are provided to those schools to support turning around those schools over a 3-year period of time. And so they get about, I want to say, $4 or $5 million a year targeted, and we can provide you the names of those schools. This is the second year because they skipped the year that the pandemic occurred in terms of requiring anything for those particular schools. So we do get additional dollars, and we've structured those schools such that a network superintendent is specifically focused on those schools at the elementary level and at the high school and middle school level. And so those network superintendents report out differently and provide different support to those schools. So a total of about 20 schools are in that category.
Okay, thank you. And you don't have to provide the list. There sounds like there's a good plan and understanding of that things have to be done for those schools on the state level and district level.
Locally, yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
And so they have a different way to get out of being comprehensive, similar to what we do with the annual performance report.
Just to follow up on that question, or do the staff have an opportunity to participate in that recovery for those comprehensive schools? Is that a mandated program, or is there some discussion at the school level for strategies to improve?
Yes, they have to write a specific plan that's approved by the state, and that plan has to be encompassing, meaning that faculty, staff, and the community engage in what that plan looks like over a 3-year period of time. So yes, yes, ma'am.
So this may be unrelated, and it's more of a question for you, Dr. Adams, but going back to what Ms. Cousins said about our homeless population and supports for them, when we talked about closing schools, one of the things that we said we wanted on our dream bucket list was all of these supports for our students, nurses, counselors, social workers, mental health professionals. Where are we at on that going into our next school year?
And I want to correct myself. I got a text, I said the wrong number. The actual number is about 4,800 kids that are identified as homeless, not 2,000. At this point in time, the last information I received, as of every Tuesday, I get an update from HR where we are. In terms of reading teachers, because all the elementary schools are supposed to have reading teachers, there are 3 shortages, not because we can't find persons certified in that area. In terms of nurses, I think the number is also 3. Nurses, family community specialists, I think are 100%. And so we are still obviously 3 weeks out before staff comes back, but about 90%, not about 95% of all of the positions have been filled based upon what we indicated. Social workers, I think we are 2 short social workers at this point in time. Again, not because we are not looking for people, but we can't find people in those areas right now. So in terms of the commitment we made, I would say at this point in time, about 95% committed to what we say we were going to do. And as it relates to the high school courses, I haven't gotten an update relative to that. But in terms of the family community specialists, social worker, counselors, security, and nurses, we're about 95%. And the only reason they're not fully filled is because people are resigning on a regular basis as we hire people. As you know, people don't come back for another couple of weeks, and some people are still making decisions.
And are we prioritizing our highest need schools with those staff placements, I would guess?
Again, principals make the selection, so we don't overbearingly determine who they hire. But yes, we're trying to focus on those schools that have the greatest need. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Could we get something identifying exactly which schools and where the nurses are, where the social workers, like something that lays out the specifics for us to see where they're placed and how many?
Where the shortages are, you mean?
No, actually where we currently have them, where we currently have the positions filled.
In every one of our elementary schools and middle schools and high schools, we committed to a full-time nurse. We've committed to a full-time reading teacher at the elementary level, with the exception of 2 schools. And obviously those are the schools that do well academically, that have reading scores above the 3rd grade level, at the 3rd grade level. As it relates to family community specialists, every school with the exception of those schools that are non-title schools have family community specialists because they're funded by that. I can get you an entire list of every single position by school, what they have and what they don't have, and the reasons why they don't have it. Schools that are not considered title schools because of the funding won't have family community specialists. They won't have a reading teacher. And there are only a handful of schools, only 3 that would be in that category, 2 or 3 that would be in that category. But I can provide you a list. My chief of staff has taken information down, and we'll have that for you as early as tomorrow.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. First, I want to thank you for the ESSER survey, the comments section. I have read through most of it. And one resounding question or fact that kept coming up was that we're not paying the same rate, our staff, as some of the other districts. And that might be the reason why a lot of we're having such a hard time filling our spots. So how are we addressing that issue with the pay difference between our district and many other districts?
So ESSA dollars cannot be used for compensation, which we could be, we can't. As you might be aware, we did contracts with all of our employees last year with a 10% increase and a one-time payment. So we have a contract in place for the next 2 years, but we did increase salaries by 10% through this contract and 9% from the previous contract. So we're working at it a bit at a time. It's not something that can happen overnight, but we are trying to get as competitive as we can. The challenge, Ms. Jones, which you might recognize, is while we go up, everybody else goes up as well. So that's the challenge. We're catching up. That's why things like TIFs and all those kinds of things are helpful to us if we're able to increase the amount of dollars that we get to support kids. So we are trying to make a difference in that space with about a 19% increase over the last 5 years.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Ms. Van Oy. And we'll come back to the board with the predictive information, Madam President, once we get all of that information.
I have one last question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of around staff too. Have we talked about having Juneteenth off as a pay day off for summer staff?
Excellent question. I'm going to come back to the board in August with a recommendation to the board relative to Juneteenth. But it is an intent right now to bring that matter before the board in early August or at the work session with the board, obviously having the ability to vote in. I tried to wait a little bit because last year around this time, we had to make some adjustment about pushing school back and make an adjustment with the calendar. I want us to get past this opening of school with the variants occurring the way it is. If we might have to make an adjustment, we make it one time as opposed to 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to give the board a brief update on the American Rescue Plan. As I indicated to the board before, I will come back before you once the committee completed their work and want to walk you through where we are right now to give you some idea of what's occurring. It's called American Rescue Plan, ARP, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, or ESSA 3, and it's specific to ESSA 3, and I'll tell you why in 1 second. The purpose, obviously, and we've had 3 conversations relative to this, so I don't think it's necessary for me to read this to you. I will highlight paragraph 3. To receive the ARP funds, ESSA 3 funds, St. Louis Public School must submit an application to the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education by Monday, August the 23rd. In May, parents, students, teachers, and community members have the opportunity to provide feedback, as Ms. Jones just indicated. The application will reflect the district's plan to utilize these funds. The only one that we have to write a plan for is ESSA 3, which represents $103 million. The first set of dollars that were considered ESSA 1, which was about $10.6 million, we did not have to write a plan to the state. Those were the funds that were approved by the Trump administration. ESSA 2, which is about $46.8 million, we did not have to write a plan for that, for those dollars either. Again, those were the ones that were approved in December of 2020, I think it was, by the Trump administration. The Biden administration in ESSA 3 is requesting a plan that has to be approved by the state and the federal government. So the 103 are the dollars that I'm really framing here around what the board has to approve at the next board meeting. The committee, again, I won't read to you again, but the ESSA committee had 4 meetings. The last meeting was last Thursday. The core concept of the aspects of the current work in SLP is aligned to the transformation plan. Again, the ESSA committee represented a wide range of parties. About 42 persons, principals, teachers, parents, community persons participated in the process. Again, these recommendations are made around being equitable and also sustainable, such that the dollars that we are looking to spend are not being spent in a way that some other dollars would have to support them after the plan was put in place. So this is kind of where we ended up. Again, it lays out May 2021 what occurred, May through July 2021 with 43 volunteers. The committee analyzed survey data and looked at some priorities. And these are the three priorities that they came up with. The three priorities are supporting the whole child, dramatically improving student learning and outcomes in and from a trauma-informed perspective, expanding 21st century schools, which means transforming our buildings to ensure innovative and equitable spaces, and lastly, investing in our staff, which is professional development, those kinds of things. And so this is kind of where they ended up. Priority number one, dramatically improving student learning and outcomes from a trauma-informed perspective, looking at purchasing educational software programs for schools to support instruction, in-person and virtual tutoring before and after school and on Saturday, additional funding to every school to support school themes and further innovation, micro grants to teachers to purchase instructional materials and instructional support, integration and implementation of social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices and restorative practice in all schools to impact overall student well-being, and tiered student support services provided by counselors, nurses, social workers, and other behavioral therapists. The issue of expanding year-round enrichment opportunities that will mean summer learning and winter and spring break camps possibly, co-teaching models in targeted schools, as Ms. Fowler asked about what we're doing with targeted schools. This would be one effort to do that. Flexible seating and calming spaces in all schools, similar to what we have at two of our schools like Central VPA right now, those kinds of rooms where kids can go and quite frankly, have calming spaces as opposed to if they need places to get away from the rush of the everyday that happens in the school. Community schools, I know that the union is a strong advocate of community schools, and all of y'all, everyone, including myself, have been and has a discussion that's taken place regarding that. Parent and family engagement funding across all schools. And lastly, social emotional learning curriculum and training in all schools, similar to the ability for kids to access their iPads or technology with apps that might allow them to take access of the social emotional ideas or things that they need to do, because they may not want to talk to Calvin Adams, but they may go on an app that might give them the ability to get support, and trauma training for all staff. So that would be priority number one. Priority number two, providing and establishing equitable building standards for all schools used to guide facility updates, water bottle filling stations, HEPA filters for air quality. We've already got some estimates on what that might look like and what the cost might be. We're still getting some of those. Some classrooms redesigned to include collaborative spaces for learning, such that the classroom is a non-traditional classroom as opposed to the regular classroom with the seats the way they are. Technology in classrooms provide engaging learning experiences for students, interactive whiteboards, which we have in like 90% of our schools, but updating those such that they're much more interactive. Some are the old school kind of boards. Spaces in schools to include STEM labs, robotics, and maker spaces, this notion of 3D printing and artificial intelligence, and obviously mitigation strategies, including air quality testing and filters in schools, which we are getting updates on right now in terms of what that looks like. And existing building structures, the notion of enhancing existing building structures. Some of the things that we have to do are based upon the fact that we have old buildings with a lot of issues that need to be updated. So while we want to do new stuff, we also have to take care of some of the old stuff that's there. Lastly, investing in our staff, teacher development and wellness centers to provide physical, social, and emotional pedagogical support to teachers, a wellness center where teachers can actually go and work out and do those kinds of things to relieve stress in some of the buildings that we've closed. Board-approved vendors to provide high-quality embedded professional learning to build staff capacity. We don't have the capacity to do all of this ourselves, so leveraging other partners in the community who are better at this than we are. Teacher development on STEM, professional learning with instructional topics such as lesson planning and professional development, and enhancing programming for teacher leadership pathways. We've talked about this notion of not having enough teachers. How do we make sure that we are trying to build a pathway for teachers? I think I told the board before, we received about a $2 million grant specifically for this area that the HR department is working on. And grow your own programs in current high schools to inspire SLPS students to teach in SLPS and create a sense of pride in teaching. We have a local university right now that's looking to partner with us with our seniors such that they get the first year as a senior in our building with enough courses such that when they get to college, they only need 3 years of college to become a teacher. So we're partnering with a local university to look to do that right now. Don't want to say the name because the MOU has not been put together yet, but those are the kinds of ideas that we're talking about. If those persons will go in the teacher education field. And we will look to also assist in terms of covering some of their tuition. The last piece that you want to see is the idea of breaking down the budget in a way that has already been indicated from the surveys that we've done. So about 70% of the budget, which will be about $70 million, some of the dollars administrative costs have to be reduced. I think that amount is 4.5%, if I'm right, Mrs. Banks. Roughly about 4.5%. So you take off about $4 to $5 million off the top of the 103, because that's administrative costs, and then the other costs are used to support what you see here. So about $65 to $70 million used for the areas you see listed here as a direct student support, about $25 million used for facility improvement, and about $5 million or thereabouts strictly targeted around training and procedure creation is what we see how the dollars will be used. How will we measure impact? This is an example of a model that we are looking at to determine how we would measure impact. I can't remember the name of the entity that we got it from, but it will be included on our website. It was cut off here. But the idea would be that we will look at the demographics, the perceptions, the student learning, and the school processes that would change as we look to spend these dollars. On the second page, which is much easier to understand, is student learning. We will look at STAR data, SAVIS data, observation and learning walks, and the frequency that we will look to judge how we are doing in that area 3 times a year, monthly and weekly. Demographic data, our panorama surveys that will be due 2 to 3 times a year, student attendance, and also daily student attendance as well. Perception data, which will be focus group that we will do quarterly, and school processes, observations and learning walks weekly, and evaluation of instructional programs in the school. And so some of these are much more qualitative and some of these are quantitative data points that we will look at. And we will also create, which I don't think is on this one, I don't see, is a data dashboard that will be updated on a monthly basis where parents in the community can see how the dollars are being spent and what the results will be. One of the things that the Council of Greater City Schools recommended is that we have somebody call an implementation director. We've hired somebody in that space on an interim basis that will be simply managing the implementation of what we're doing in this space. $103 million is a lot of money, and we want to make sure that we're updating the public and the board on a regular basis of how the dollars are being spent, where the dollars are being spent, and what kind of impact is occurring for the dollars that we are receiving. So the next steps, the plan will be posted on the district website tonight. The PowerPoint you see asking for feedback from families. The survey results from stakeholders will also be available. Again, we'll put those back on the website, the similar ones that Ms. Jones alluded to. We want to put those back on the website again. A small work committee will begin meeting to work on the details and implementation of the plan. The state provided us with the overall plan on Friday, and it's not that detailed. And so what we have to do is obviously accommodate the state in terms of what they're looking for, but also we need to have much more detail than what the state is asking for. And so you don't have a lot of detail here around how much will go to each school, where it will go. That's what the committee will be working on to provide back to the board on the 10th. This is overall. And so we're providing an overall plan, but we have to come back and flesh out the details of how much money is going to be spent moving forward. And I'll give you just one example of how difficult that is. One of the challenges for us in ESSER 3 is that there are brand new criteria around equity, brand new criteria around, what is it called, Mrs. Banks? Comparability. meaning that if I give Dr. Roberts a certain amount of money in a school, I have to make sure that what was there in place prior to the dollars coming still continues after the dollars are gone. And so it's really, really complicated around ESSER $3. Again, a lot of flexibility around ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. ESSER 3 has us scratching our head because there are a lot of details that have to be put in place to accommodate what the feds are asking for with ESSER $3. So we're going to do a plan to the state, which we have to do by the 24th of August. But the background information that we have to put in place, because we are such a large district with a lot of complications around magnet schools and comparability and all of those kinds of things, we have to be very, very careful about how we nuance all of that stuff. That's why a team of persons will be coming together over the next 2 weeks to kind of talk about that, because we need to have our title person at the table. We have to have the person who's doing the director of implementation. We have to have our new academic officer at the table. We have to have our facility persons at the table. We can't just spend money. And I think Dr. Roberts asked me this question in our one-on-one last week. Can we spend money a certain way to do X, Y, Z around a facility? We might can, we might can't. We need to find out what that means. We may not be able to spend money in a certain way based upon what we think. And that's why we have to go through the details of understanding the requirements of ESSER 3 compared to ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. So the plan will be submitted to the state on the 23rd, and we will come back to the board on the 10th with a lot more details that the board can see. But from a public perspective, what we're asking persons to do is give us feedback around the larger plan. Questions that the board might have?
I had, oh, go ahead.
Is it that the SR1 and SR2 funds that we're utilizing is to kind of help enhance, or the SR3 would basically be able to like close out whatever we've done with the SR1 and $2?
Not necessarily. If you look at page 1, these are the ways that the dollars can be spent, irrespective if it's 1, 2, or 3. It's just that the complications of 3 are such that they take into some things that they're treating them like old Title I dollars.
Okay.
ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, we were given wide flexibility because, as you remember, we were trying to get kids back in school quickly. And so kids are back in school, and two sets of dollars have already been given. So the flexibility that existed for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 is kind of gone away because you've already gotten dollars. Now we want you to follow the structures that we had in place. Plus, we've added a brand new one called equity. Equity wasn't in ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, and we've never used equity in title before. Am I right, Ms. Banks? We've never used this concept of equity, but everybody's talking about equity, but we have to justify equity and how we spend these dollars and how the feds are going to hold us accountable, because it's a term that we've never used before for any of our dollars, ever. And so that makes it complicated for us when you have a district that's 100% free and reduced lunch and 88% minority.
So it's new territory.
It's brand new territory that we have to figure out, and we want to be very, very careful about it, because at the end of the day, I don't want the public or you or me to come back and say, what happened to the $103 million? We didn't do something right, so we have to pay it back, or we have to, do some things differently. So we want to be really careful around how we do the ESSER $3.
Dr. Adams, my question is on the last page where we talk about next steps. I know we talked about doing a heavy media campaign, and you talk about the district's website, and this is where it will be posted. Are we utilizing any other form of media to do this as well?
We did put it in a newspaper for the first time. We did the survey. We got no responses from that, but we did go to the American and ask them to do so. We did do radio as well. To be quite honest with you, Ms. Jones, we will likely be focusing more on getting kids back in school than this information, because we put it out before. We're going to put it out again on our website. We're going to put it out as well in other media spots as well. But our real focus has been registration, getting kids back in school. And so this happens to happen around the same time, around the same window. I didn't provide to the board today, and I promised I would, and I forgot. Ms. Willis, if you could remind me so I could get to the board, our plan for marketing. We put out a plan for marketing based upon the comments we got from the legislative committee when we met about 2 weeks ago. And so Ms. Willis has put together a plan that lays out radio, television, all of those kinds of things. So we've been focused, quite frankly, Ms. Jones, on getting kids back in school, not so much around the survey information, because we put it out at least 2 or 3 times, at least twice before. We're going to put it out again, hoping to get some comments, but representation has been at the table from the community, from teachers, from parents, relative to the 43 people that were participating.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I had a question on the people who did participate in the ESSER committee. How were they chosen? Was it an open application? I mean, not trying to micromanage that, obviously. I'm sure there are some staff and everything to consider, but when we're talking about stakeholders from the business community and parents, and just curious what that procedure was.
So principals volunteered, central office volunteered, the union gave us names for teachers, our PAC committee gave us names for parents, and the community, it wasn't business people, it was mainly community persons, came from the MOUs we do. And so we went to those persons that we normally have agreements with, and those were the persons who were nominated to participate. We did not put out anything in terms of volunteering to be part of this. There was one organization that did come to us and ask to participate, and we sent them to the PAC for the PAC to determine if that parent needs to be a part of it based upon the PAC committee. So we did go to those usual suspects, if you will, who we had relationships with.
And is it possible to provide the board with a list of the names of the participants, or is that protected?
Oh, no, we can provide that to you.
Okay, just for the sake of transparency.
Yes, ma'am. We'll provide the 42 names to you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And my other question was surrounding all the upgrades that are happening. Do we have a plan or a district policy already in place for what happens to the surplus, the old things that we are getting rid of?
Yes, the board does have a policy for a surplus. Normally what has to happen is we have to come to the board normally in April or May for the board to approve what happens to surplus. And then Mr. Watson, you could correct me a little bit if you're still in here, is that we have to put it out for persons to come. Is it purchase it? Mr. Watson's not here. Yes, we do have a policy. I can send a policy to you. We'll put it in place before. I just don't remember all of the details, but there, we do have to list that material, and then there's a process to follow for surplus material.
Thank you.
A few questions. The first question I have is, and I just want to clarify, you said that with ESSER 3, we have to have in place a plan that where the funding continues with the school. Is that correct?
Now, with ESSER 3, with all of them, quite frankly, we want to make sure that whatever we do is sustainable past the dollars coming.
Is that a federal requirement or something we're requiring ourselves?
We're requiring ourselves.
Okay, great.
That's
Okay,
just good business, because we don't want to
Right,
spend
right.
money for 2
Okay.
years and then
Right.
don't have a way to continue it. That's
Okay,
correct.
yeah, my concern is if it was a federal requirement, then that would
No,
be quite
no,
a challenge.
no.
And another question I have, you said that on the top, there's 4.5% in administration costs, which comes out to be about 4.6 million. I guess I'm trying to find out what those administration costs would be. I mean, are we hiring new people other than the implementation director, or are we using existing staff to administer ESSER 3? And if that's the case, when we have extra money from that administrative percent?
So I can't speak for Mrs. Banks, but I want to be really careful because I know her eyes are on me. It is my understanding that's discretionary for these kinds of funds. If I'm wrong, Ms. Banks, please clarify.
It's considered our indirect percentage of the ESSER funds, and it's really for
It's really for all of the funds with the exception of capital expenditures, just like all of our federal funds have an indirect rate
Right.
that basically is used to offset the administrative costs. And generally, those are in the general fund or in our GOB fund, and we will offset some of those costs with those indirect rates. So clearly, with these large dollars, there's an opportunity. If we need to hire people, we can certainly use those funds, or we would just offset some of the GOB staffing that we currently have.
Now
And a
you're-
lot of times we kind of start with, finance staff,
Right.
like that.
Now, your indirect rate, do you guys calculate that using a indirect plan that's laid out, or do you guys just accept the federal standard rate? Because I think their rate is 10%, right? And why would ours be 4.6%?
Well, DESE actually calculates the
Okay.
indirect rate for all the
DESE does.
districts.
Okay,
Yes.
DESE does the calculation. Okay, great. Okay, then the other questions I have are, when we talk about the buildings and so forth, I know back in the winter, we had a presentation about some of the vent cleaning and some issues that were related to the schools. Are we going to be in this infrastructure plan? Are we going to be using some of those dollars to take care of those things? Since it seemed to be a fairly big problem back in January or February, maybe even December. I'm not sure when it was. Since especially with the COVID and people coming back and with COVID, and we are very aware that there are air quality issues in our schools. Will we be doing that as well? I see HEPA filters, but I don't really see anything that specifically relates to the other issues that we discussed back in the winter.
Yes, ma'am. We do have a school by school analysis that we are likely going to be reviewing. And so, yes, we will be, and I'll be coming back to the board likely, if not the next meeting, then the following meeting, on what we will be looking to do specifically in schools relative to that. So, yes.
And then on the part about we have the transforming schools, and we're adding spaces in the schools for STEM, robotics, and maker space, which is good. But I guess our biggest challenge, of course, is challenges are reading and math. I guess I want to make sure that we are spending the dollars based on the goals we've set for you to appropriately address student learning in reading and math. Because to me, I guess if you can't read and you can't do the math like you should, you're going to have a hard time with the STEM and robotics. I mean, I just want to make sure we are focusing those funds on the areas that are most problematic for our district.
Yes, ma'am. Reading, math, and college and career are the three focuses, and those dollars are going to be spent in a targeted way. We're not excluding STEM and those other kinds of things, but if you could see on this slide, we're going to spend about $70 million in that space. And so we will cover, obviously, reading and math and college and career, but dollars. We had Prop S labs, and those were dollars that were labs that were put in place several years ago when we had a proposition passed. We're looking to kind of convert some of those from computer labs to STEM labs. And so that's what we're talking about here, some conversion, because all of our high schools have one and of all our elementary and middle schools have one. So it's about a conversion much more than a replacement.
Okay. And then the last question I have is concerning me is about the equity. I mean, did the federal government define equity? What that means for us? Did DESE define equity, or do we define what that means for us?
They are defining it.
The federal Fed or DESE?
It's my understanding the feds are.
Okay.
And so we're still trying to understand it. The state is still trying to understand it. Again, all of this information just came out in the last couple of weeks. And once the team started looking at it, they had some concerns with a district with 60 schools and the kind of comparability challenges we have. They just want to make sure that they're dotting the I's and crossing the T's and getting approval before we move down that road. Even so, Madam Board Member, it may be that we may be requesting that the ESSA 3 funds not be used at all this year, but be used in year 2 and year 3 to give us enough time, since we have $46 million that we can access right now and still use, and push the requirements for these dollars down the road to give us more time to adequately make sure we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So that might be one of the things I might be coming back to the board to discuss, since that was something that came to me as a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Adams, I was glad to hear that last statement. This is a good start on an ESSER plan, but it's almost like a laundry list, and there's no real detail there. And so to spend the time putting in the detail, I think will have an impact in terms of what our kids know and are able to do.
So we must turn in something by the 24th, and we will. But to your point, the state is not asking for a whole lot of detail, but we know we need a lot of detail. And so, as I said before, it may mean that we come back to the board and say, for the 21-22 school year, we don't use ESSA $3. We'll use ESSA 1 and ESSA $2, and then we'll come back the following year when we know all of the details and look at spending ESSA $3 in those 2 years, because we will have gotten all of the kinks worked out with the feds and the state relative to that. So that's not what I'm recommending today, because the committee has to come back together. But it is something that has come to me that we we might be coming back to the board about. Thank you very much.
We're at the section of the agenda for board member reports. Matt, can we start with you?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to remind everybody that our board retreat that the governance committee has established, Janet Tilley from MSBA will be convening that for us, is this Saturday here at 801 from 2 to 6. I'd also like to give a brief report about our legislative and advocacy committee. We had our first meeting on July 17th. It was an introductory meeting to sort of go over what the plan is and to sort of establish ourselves as a committee. Our next meeting will be at the end of August. We're still trying to finalize the date, but we'll let you know as soon as that happens and provide some more detail. I'll provide some more detail at the board meeting about what that agenda will be. And then finally, sort of along that line, Alderman Jesse Todd did introduce a resolution at the Board of Aldermen last Friday regarding the moratorium from this board's resolution back in February. That resolution was referred to the Education and Youth Committee chaired by Alderwoman Green. And so the Board of Aldermen is on recess till September. So we anticipate that they'll take that back up. And along those lines, I sent the copy to all of the board members, but our former board president, Dorothy Rhodey Collins, had an excellent op-ed in the newspaper. I think it's actually being published tomorrow in the paper, but it was online today, which really made a very strong argument for the Board of Aldermen to pass that moratorium. So I would commend everyone to take a look at that. And thanks to former President Rhodey Collins for her continued support.
No, okay, I just want to make sure. I just want to update everybody just on the governance committee. We had 4 goals, which is updating the code of ethics and creating a self-evaluation, which I think we'll be getting soon. Those things have been done. Another thing we were working on was onboarding, which part of it is the onboarding session we're having on Saturday, but an onboarding plan to be carried into the future is also going to be created and being worked on currently. And then we're also working on updating the board policies, and we are set to meet sometime in August, and we will be starting to review those policies. Just for information, if anybody wants to go out and understand and know what policies we're talking about, it's the Article 9 policies. If you guys want to get a head start on looking at those policies before we present something, that would be great. And I also want to just thank Matt for taking on that onboarding session on Saturday, because he organized that, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
Natalie?
I have no report at this time.
No report.
So I wanted to just share that I met with Dr. Adams last week, I think on July 19th, on Monday. We had a really good conversation, and some of the conversation was around some of the things that I saw put into the ESSER plan, specifically the ideas around maybe making like mental health apps accessible through the iPads that we provide to the students, and the wellness spaces and several things. So thank you, Dr. Adams, for taking that back to the committee and making that time to meet. Also, that the TIF board commission meeting was canceled this month. It's usually every second Wednesday from 8:30 to 10:30, but it was canceled this month. They just stated that they were working on something and wanted a chance to talk to other elected officials and would follow up with us this coming month. So that meeting will be August 11th. There was also a panel that the St. Louis Young Democrats hosted, where they talked about specifically St. Louis Public Schools and the TIF Commission. Myself, Alderwoman Green, I know that I'm Tina Sweet, Alderwoman Tina Sweet Tea, and someone else that I'm forgetting.
Jerry Connolly.
Yes, Mary Connolly was on the panel. It was a really good conversation. It had a lot of good engagement there as well. And then the last thing, I'm not sure about the process for this, so I kind of just wanted to bring this to the board. I was thinking of starting sort of a newsletter. A lot of people ask, and I'm sure we all know the same questions, like, what are you going to do around COVID? And like, what are you going to do with the ESSER money? And so like creating something where folks that know that I'm in this space can access information. And so most of it would be factual information, things that we present in our reports, but a lot of people, you know, don't watch the meetings or attend. So they could just see, these are the things that I think you should know. These are some of my personal reflections, and just wanted to bring that to you all and let you all know. And if you wanted to give feedback on that as well. And then also same thing, I really like the article that the former president, Dorothy Collins put in the paper. I thought it gave a really good push toward the moratorium. And also thank you, Dr. Roberts, for attending that meeting in my place since I couldn't make it to our first one.
I just wanted to share a few things with the public and with the board. Dr. Adams, I know I've asked, share with you the need to begin to cultivate school board members so that everyone who wants to come on board has an idea of what the expectations are. And so I have some information to share on that point that hopefully you can refine and post so that everyone knows what the expectation is. The other thing I'd like to share is that St. Louis County has a professional learning community of school board members. I have attended those sessions. I just invited myself. I'm always interested in learning. And one of the things that we know that we're being impacted by charter, but charter is coming to rural areas as well. We know we have one in the Normandy School District. So the PLC wants to collaborate around what we can do in a legislative way in Jeff City. And just a few of the questions: how does your board get information about legislation proposed in Jeff City? How does your board assess the impact of proposed legislation on your board and district? And this is some information that I will share with you, expected in your email. One of the points being discussed in Jeff City now is one on critical race theory. And I think that's important for us to be informed. And so I do have a statement that was provided by the Council of Great City Schools. As you know, they are representing 77 urban school districts. And so I do have that information to share with you as well. I want to congratulate Dr. Adams and Ms. Willis for moving forward on our suggestions to begin marketing the St. Louis Public Schools District. I was up way too early this morning, and I heard Ms. Willis talk about St. Louis Public Schools. And so I hope that we continue that effort. And that was also one of the things that Senator Carla May had a question regarding as well. One of the things we decided to do as a board early on before our new members, we had planned to attend other school board meetings just to get a frame of reference. And COVID kind of put a stop to that for the group. But we can also take a look and decide as a board to view school board meetings from around the country. And we have access to those school districts as a part of our affiliation with the Council of Great City Schools. And so I will share that with you as well. And that concludes my report.
Dr. Roberts, I have a couple questions. One for Alicia. You talked about the newsletter. Is that newsletter, you want the board to do a newsletter, or are you talking about you doing a newsletter? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so it would be my newsletter, but I would be happy to like probably include it with my report every month because I envision releasing it on a monthly basis. And a lot of the information will be things that we talk about in this space. It may be some of the exact same information, just putting into like written format, just, you know, 'cause since people are not usually going to sit through. So some of the common questions that I get, giving them one point, hey, you can go click on this and see like my thoughts. But I would bring it here and show it to you all. Also, some of you all know already I'm good for calling and texting if I have questions about certain things. So I might like reach out to you all about your thoughts on something as well.
Okay, thanks. That's what I was trying to clarify. And another thing I was asking, and I've written this down earlier and forgot, but Dr. Roberts mentioned it again, and it's regarding the marketing. Does the district have a staff member that oversees marketing?
Believe it or not, that person did move on to Shelby County, Tennessee about 3 weeks ago. The team has interviewed approximately 15 candidates, 10 candidates. They have a recommendation for me. I'll be meeting with that person Thursday. That's the recommendation they had. So we do have someone in that role, Director of Communication, I think is the right title. Director of Marketing Communications. So we do have a law right now with the person moving on June 30th. I think they left officially on June 30th. And I'm hoping to hire somebody as early as the next 5 days.
So just one follow-up on your newsletter, Alicia. I just want to make sure that we're being cautious of two things. One is the perception of speaking on behalf of the board. That's generally the specific role of the board. The board president is to speak on behalf of the board. And also the format that it would be used or that it would be pushed out through. So if it's like a Facebook or a web page, I mean, I think that's fine because it's privately managed. If we're wanting to do something with, you know, with your SLPS email address or with your, you know, your ties to the district or district resources, we have to be careful of the perception of campaigning and the perception of, you know, is it officially district information or is it one person's opinion? Because often I will have dissenting votes and it's, you know, my reflection on it might be different than what the board's official stance is. So just some food for thought there, just to uphold good governance practices.
Yeah, it'll be through maybe like MailChimp or something that people would subscribe to. I'll be very clear in it that this is like Board of Education, like official, what was presented to us, or this is the official vote that we took. And then any personal reflections, I'll make sure I make it perfectly clear that it's personal reflections. So it won't be too different than what most of us do on our social medias, honestly. It would just be in an official format in a way for me to be like when we were campaigning, we talked a lot about transparency. So just another way to be transparent and engaging people and giving folks one way to go. But I'll definitely be clear in that, like, obviously we have a board of seven people. And I honestly, and I'll show you guys too as it goes.
I just wanted to say as well that I did have some concerns after reading the article in the St. Louis American. And whenever a board member makes a comment, I was thinking, we had a policy before all the new board members, and I know you're not aware of it, that the board president makes the comments to the public. And you usually discuss whatever you're going to talk about with the board so that we can come to some kind of agreement. But I do understand that we all have our own personal Facebook pages and what have you. And I voice my own opinions, but I do try to make people understand that this is just my opinion and not the opinion of the board. That's it.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, I move that this meeting is adjourned. Can I
Second.
get a motion?
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Ms. Bell, can you take the roll?
Ms. Sonier,
Yes.
Ms. Cousins,
Yes.
Ms. Fowler,
Yes.
Ms. Vowell, Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Ms. Jones. Dr. Roberts.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.